This story is titled, Fiancé's Parents Demanded I Pay Off Their Mortgage as a Respect Token. I refused and canceled the engagement. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey guys, so I never thought I'd be writing about my personal life like this, but I guess life throws you some stuff you just can't make up. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for the last year, I really thought I had everything figured out. I was engaged to this amazing woman, Lauren, and I was genuinely excited about building a future with her. We met through mutual friends at this game night thing a couple of years ago. She was funny, smart, and honestly just really easy to talk to. We started dating, and everything just felt right. Like, we didn't have a ton of drama, and we had similar goals. Getting a house someday, having kids, traveling, all the stuff you dream about when you're in that honeymoon phase of a relationship. After a year of dating, I proposed. I kept it simple, nothing crazy, just the two of us at the park where we had our first date. She cried and said yes. It felt perfect. For the first few months, things were great. We were talking about wedding venues, food, colors, all the usual stuff. Lauren's parents, James and Patricia, were super involved from the start. They were those very opinionated types, but I figured, hey, it's their daughter's wedding. They're allowed to have some input. James, her dad, is one of those guys who acts like he's always the smartest person in the room. He's retired now, but he worked in finance for years, so he loves throwing around terms like return on investment, even when they don't apply. Patricia, her mom, is super particular about appearances. Everything has to be just right, or she'll make a passive-aggressive comment about it. At first, it was just small stuff. James didn't like the venue I suggested because it was too far from their friends, and Patricia had a lot to say about the catering option. I figured it was normal future in-law stuff, so I let it slide. Lauren seemed to take their side more often than not, but I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. Then things started to get weird. Patricia started making these little comments whenever wedding expenses came up. Stuff like, well, traditionally, the groom's family pays for the wedding, right? Or, a real man shows he can take care of his bride's family. I thought she was joking, but since she kept saying it, it started to feel less like a joke and more like a hint. I was already covering most of the costs. Lauren and I had agreed that I'd handle the venue and catering, which were the two biggest expenses. Her parents were supposed to pay for the flowers and decorations, but even that turned into a whole thing. Patricia kept suggesting upgrades that were way over budget, and when I pushed back, she'd just sigh and say, I guess we'll make do. Still, I told myself it wasn't worth making a big deal over. I loved Lauren, and dealing with her parents was just part of the package, or so I thought. Now here's what happened a couple of weeks ago. We were having dinner at Lauren's parents' house. Things were normal at first. James was talking about golf. Patricia was showing us some Pinterest board for wedding ideas. Then, completely out of nowhere, James turns to me and says, "We've been meaning to talk to you about something important." I thought maybe he was going to give me some fatherly advice or ask about my job, but no. He straight up says, "In our family, it's customary for the man marrying into the family to take on a significant responsibility as a sign of respect. For us, that means paying off our mortgage." I almost choked on my drink. I literally laughed because I thought he was kidding. When I realized he wasn't, I asked, "Wait, you're asking me to pay off your house?" He nodded, completely serious, and said, "It's not just a request. It's a tradition in our extended family. It shows that you're committed to providing for your wife and her family." I didn't even know what to say. I looked at Lauren, expecting her to jump in and tell her dad that this was ridiculous, but she just looked uncomfortable and said, "We'll talk about it later." I tried to play it cool for the rest of the dinner, but my mind was spinning. What kind of tradition involves demanding tens of thousands of dollars from your future son-in-law? And why hadn't Lauren warned me about this before? When we got back to my place, I brought it up immediately. "What was that about?" I asked her. "Your dad just asked me to pay off his mortgage. Did you know about this?" She hesitated and then said, "I didn't know he was going to ask tonight, but yeah, I knew he might bring it up at some point." I was stunned. "And you didn't think to tell me?" She looked defensive and said, "I didn't think it was a big deal. I figured we'd talk about it when the time came." I was completely floored. "Lauren, this isn't just some minor favor. They're asking me to pay off their house. That's insane." She sighed and said, "Look, I know it's a lot, but it's important to them. They've done so much for me, and this is just how they do things in our family." I asked her if she thought it was reasonable, and she said, "Maybe we can figure something out. You've got savings, and we could take out a small loan if we need to." I was stunned how she's so convinced with this nonsense. This was about knowing my worth and refusing to be walked over. I told her I wasn't comfortable with it, and she said, "Let's just think about it, okay? I don't want to upset them." Over the next few days, her parents kept bringing it up. Patricia would drop little comments like, "It's a small price to pay for joining the family," and James started acting like it was already decided. One night, James invited me to meet him at a cafe to talk it over. When I got there, he had a whole folder of paperwork, mortgage statements, payment schedules, even a breakdown of how quickly it could be paid off if I made large lump sum payments. He acted like we were finalizing a business deal. He even said, "This isn't just about the money, it's about respect. Once the mortgage is cleared, you'll gain a lot of standing with our family." I couldn't believe his boldness. I told him I needed time to think about it, but in my head, I was already done. There was no way I was going to do this. That night, I started questioning everything. If this was how they were acting now, what would the future look like? How many more family traditions would they spring on me? And why wasn't Lauren standing up for me? I don't have the answers yet, but I know one thing. This isn't normal. Am I the only one who thinks this? Tell me guys what you think. I'll start posting updates if they don't cancel this stupid tradition thing. Update 1. Hey guys! So the whole situation was sitting heavy on my mind for days, like a weight I couldn't shake off. I mean, who does this? Who demand their son-in-law to pay off their mortgage? So after I met with James, I woke up the next morning still trying to process everything. I couldn't stop thinking about the way James had laid out those mortgage papers like we were negotiating a contract. I kept asking myself, what kind of family operates like this? I wanted to talk to Lauren again, but every time I brought up her parents, she got defensive. That day, I decided to put my foot down. I told her we needed to have a serious conversation about this so-called tradition and where her priorities were. When we sat down to talk, I started with, "Look, I need to understand something. Do you really think it's okay for your parents to expect me to pay off their mortgage?" Lauren didn't answer right away. She looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to pick a side. After what felt like forever, she finally said, "It's not about the money. It's about respect. In their eyes, this shows you're serious about becoming part of the family." I stared at her, trying to stay calm. "Lauren, I am serious about you. That's why I proposed. But paying off someone else's house? That's not love or respect. That's something else entirely." She sighed and said, "I get it, okay? I get why you're upset. But you have to understand. They're old-fashioned. My dad believes the man marrying into the family should take on a big responsibility to prove he's ready." That explanation didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just old-fashioned. It felt manipulative, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like they were using Lauren to get to me. Things only got worse from there. Over the next week, Patricia started dropping even more pointed comments. Whenever we were around her, she'd find a way to bring up how much they'd sacrificed for Lauren growing up. One day, she went on this long rant about how they'd put Lauren through private school and helped her buy her first car. She finished with, "We've always done everything for her, and now it's time for her future husband to step up." I wanted to scream. They were acting like paying off their house was some rite of passage, like I wasn't worthy of marrying Lauren, unless I handed over my life savings. James, meanwhile, doubled down on his strategy. He started texting me links to articles about family traditions in different cultures, and even sent me a list of wealth-building tips for young couples. The nerve of this guy, like I didn't already know how to manage my money. When I told Lauren about it, she brushed it off. "That's just how my dad is," she said. "He likes to make things a big deal." It wasn't just the mortgage that was eating at me. It was the way they were treating me, like I was some cash machine they could manipulate. Every time I tried to stand my ground, they acted like I was being selfish. One evening, Patricia actually said, "It's not like we're asking you to do something outrageous. It's a house. It's an investment for the family's future." The family's future? Whose future were we even talking about? Certainly not mine. Lauren and I hadn't even started saving for our own house yet, and they wanted me to sink tens of thousands into theirs. Even if I already have a house, I would still use this money for our honeymoon, not on her parents' mortgage. I started wondering how long they'd been planning this. Was this something they'd talked about before I even proposed? Did Lauren know all along and just not tell me? Then came the dinner that nearly broke me. James and Patricia invited us over, saying they wanted to clear the air. I hoped, naively, that they were going to apologize or at least back off a little. Instead, James launched into this long speech about how their family had a tradition of supporting each other, and how this was my chance to show I was ready to be part of something bigger than myself. He even tried to blackmail me by bringing up Lauren's grandparents. When my father-in-law got married, He helped his wife's parents buy their first home, James said. It's just how we've always done things. I couldn't hold back anymore. I looked him in the eye and said, with all due respect, that's not how my family does things. My parents taught me to work hard and build something for myself, not take on someone else's debt. James didn't like that. He gave me this patronizing look and said, "You're still a boy. You'll understand when you're older." That was it for me. I stood up, excused myself, and told Lauren I'd wait for her in the car. I couldn't sit there and listen to them lecture me about how I wasn't measuring up to their ridiculous standards. Later that night, Lauren and I had another argument. I told her I couldn't keep going like this, that her parents were crossing every boundary imaginable. She got defensive again, saying, "Why are you making this such a big deal? It's not like they're asking you to pay it all at once. We could work something out." "Work something out?" I snapped. "Lauren, this isn't a negotiation. This is my life we're talking about. My savings, my future. How can you expect me to just hand it over?" She didn't have an answer. Instead, she just kept saying, "I don't want to fight about this. Can't we just figure it out together?" But we weren't figuring it out together. It felt like I was fighting this battle alone, and Lauren was just watching from the sidelines. The final straw came when Patricia called me directly. She said she wanted to talk woman to man, which was already weird, but I went along with it. She started by saying how much they loved me and how they were so excited to have me in the family. Then she shifted gears. "You know," she said, "this isn't just about the money. It's about trust. If we can't trust you to take care of something as simple as this, how can we trust you to take care of Lauren?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, "This has nothing to do with trust. It's about what's fair. And what you're asking for isn't fair." Patricia didn't like that. She said, "I'm just worried about how this will look to the rest of the family. If you refuse, people might think you're not serious about this marriage." I told her I wasn't going to change my mind, and she hung up on me. By this point, I was starting to feel like I didn't even recognize the family I was marrying into. The Lauren I fell in love with would never have gone along with this. Or at least, that's what I thought. But every time I tried to talk to her about it, she acted like I was the problem and that I should move past it. But how could I move past it? Her parents weren't just asking for money. They were testing how much control they could have over my life. And Lauren wasn't standing up to them. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the mortgage. This was about power. And if I didn't draw the line now, I might never get the chance. I don't know where this is heading to, but I feel like something has to give. And soon. Thank you guys for all your comments. It makes me more comfortable venting in here. I'll keep you updated. Update 2. Hey again, you won't believe how things unraveled. Okay, so at this point I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I was already feeling the weight of their demands. And it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what this all said about Lauren and her family. But even as I thought about ending things, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than they were letting on. The way James and Patricia kept pushing didn't feel like normal boldness. It felt calculated, almost like they had a plan. That night, after another pointless argument with Lauren where she basically told me to stop overthinking, I decided to do some digging. It started with something simple. Remember that meeting with James at the cafe that felt more like a business negotiation? That time, he left a folder there. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I couldn't stop wondering what might be in there. I remembered that he'd been oddly protective of the folder, flipping through it like it was the key to their whole argument. I texted Lauren, asking if she could ask her dad about it. She replied almost immediately, "Just drop it. It's not important." That made me even more suspicious. Lauren wasn't one to dismiss things like that so quickly. And honestly, I was tired of playing nice. I decided to call James directly. "Hey James," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I was thinking about our meeting the other day, and I remembered you had some papers with you. You left them behind, didn't you?" There was a pause, just long enough to make me think I'd hit a nerve. Then he said, "Oh, those were nothing. Just some financial notes I was working on. Don't worry about it." Yeah, I didn't believe that. The next day, I went back to the cafe to see if they'd kept the folder. I know it sounds paranoid, but I needed to see for myself what he was so eager to hide. To my surprise, the manager handed it over without hesitation. "Someone left this a while back. No one's come for it, so it's yours if you need it." Inside the folder was a mix of random documents, mortgage statements, a few receipts, and what looked like notes James had written to himself. At first glance, it was exactly what he'd said, just financial stuff. But then I noticed something odd. One of the receipts wasn't for anything related to their house. It was for a payment to a place called Alden Ridge Estates. I'd never heard of it before, so I Googled it. Turns out Alden Ridge isn't a mortgage company or a bank. It's a luxury rehab center. That's when things started clicking. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the receipts with the notes James had scribbled in the folder. It didn't take long to piece it together. James had spent months at Alden Ridge, and it wasn't cheap. The rehab center catered to high-profile clients, offering discreet treatment for things like gambling addiction. Turns out, the mortgage wasn't the issue at all. They were trying to cover the cost of James's rehab. Suddenly, everything made sense. The urgency, the constant pressure, the way Patricia kept talking about sacrifices they'd made. It was all a cover for the mess James had created. I couldn't believe they were trying to pass this off as a family tradition. They weren't just being entitled, they were outright lying. That night, I confronted Lauren. "Do you know what Alden Ridge Estates is?" I asked her, holding up the receipt. Her face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that your parents have been lying to me. They don't want me to pay off their mortgage. They want me to cover James's rehab. Did you know about this?" Lauren didn't answer right away. She just stared at the receipt like it was going to disappear if she looked hard enough. Finally, she said, "I didn't think you'd find out like this." So, she did know. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal bubbling up inside me. "How long have you known?" She sighed and sat down on the couch. "My dad went to rehab last year. He had a problem with gambling. It got bad, and my mom made him go. But the bills were more than they expected, and now they're trying to figure out how to pay it off. And they thought the best solution was to con their future son-in-law into covering it? It's not like that," she said quickly. "They didn't mean to lie. They just didn't know how to ask for help." "Help?" I repeated, almost laughing. "Lauren, they've been working the guilt card on me for weeks. They've called me disrespectful, questioned whether I'm serious about this marriage, and even tried to frame it as some kind of tradition. That's not asking for help. That's straight-up manipulation." The more we talked, the more frustrated I became. Lauren kept defending them, saying things like, "They're just under a lot of stress," and "They didn't mean any harm." But harm or not, the fact remained. They had lied to me. I asked her why she didn't tell me the truth sooner, and her answer made my blood boil. "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "I figured you'd say no anyway, so why bring it up?" It didn't matter? This wasn't a small misunderstanding. This was a calculated effort to deceive me into taking on tens of thousands of dollars of debt to clean up after James. I couldn't pass the thought that they hadn't just lied to me. They'd tried to control me. They wanted me to feel obligated to them, like I owed them something just for being part of their family. And Lauren, instead of standing by me, had been complicit in the whole thing. The day after I found out their mess, I knew I couldn't ignore this any longer. I needed to make a decision about what kind of future I wanted, and whether Lauren and her family had any place in it. The next day, I called my dad to tell him what was going on. He listened quietly as I explained everything, and when I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Son," he said, "this isn't just a red flag. This is a giant billboard telling you to run. They're not just trying to take advantage of you, they're trying to control you. And if you give in now, it's only going to get worse." He was right. Deep down, I already knew that, but hearing it from someone else made it real. I told him I wasn't sure what to do next, and he said, "Just be honest with yourself. If this is how they act before you're even married, imagine what the rest of your life will look like." That hit hard, and he was right. When I got off the phone, I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. I needed to figure out how to approach Lauren and her parents without letting my emotions take over. For now, one thing is clear. I can't let this go. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about trust. And once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to get it back. Update 3. Okay, folks, I'm back with the update you all have been waiting for. So after sitting with everything for a day, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. If I didn't confront them now, I'd be sending a message that I was okay with how they treated me. And I wasn't. Not even close. I called Lauren that evening and told her we needed to have a serious talk. Not just the two of us, but with her parents too. She sounded hesitant, almost annoyed, but she agreed. "Fine," she said. "But can we at least try to keep it calm? I don't want this to turn into a fight." That made me laugh bitterly. "Lauren, your parents have been lying to me for weeks. I think I'm allowed to be upset." The next night, I showed up at James and Patricia's house. Lauren was already there, and she looked nervous, like she was bracing herself for what was about to happen. James greeted me at the door with his usual fake smile, and Patricia gave me one of her overly sweet, condescending nice-to-see-you comments. I didn't waste any time. Once we were all sitting in the living room, I said, "We need to talk about this mortgage, or whatever you want to call it." James gave me a confused look, but I could tell it was just for show. "What's there to talk about?" he asked, leaning back like he had nothing to hide. I pulled out the receipt from that Alden Ridge Estates and set it on the coffee table. "How about the fact that this has nothing to do with a mortgage? You've been lying to me, and I want to know why." Patricia's face went pale, and for the first time since I met James, he looked genuinely caught off guard. He leaned forward, squinting at the paper, and then glanced at Lauren. You told him? Lauren shook her head quickly. No, he found it on his own. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you knew she wasn't going to tell me, and you were okay with that? Do you even realize how insane this is? James cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Look, he said, I don't know what you think you figured out, but this doesn't concern you. I laughed. It doesn't concern me? You've spent weeks trying to guilt me into paying off tens of thousands of dollars in rehab debt, and you think it doesn't concern me? Patricia tried to jump in. It's not what you think, she said quickly. We were going to tell you eventually. We just didn't want you to get the wrong idea. The wrong idea? I repeated. The only idea I have is that you're willing to manipulate and lie to me to cover up your mess. And you were going to let me start my marriage under false pretenses. Do you realize how messed up that is? James's fake calm started to crack. You don't understand what we've been through, he said, and started yelling. Do you think I wanted to go to that place? Do you think it was easy for us to deal with this? I did it for my family. And now you're trying to make me pay for it, I shot back. You didn't even give me the choice. You just decided I was going to foot the bill and pretended it was some family tradition. How do you justify that? James didn't answer, but Patricia wasn't done. We've given Lauren everything, she said, her voice trembling like she was about to cry. Private school, a car, a college education. Do you know how much we've sacrificed for her? And now, all we're asking is for a little help in return. Help! I snapped. You didn't ask for help. You demanded it, and you tried to guilt me into thinking it was my responsibility. That's not asking for help. That's manipulation. Lauren finally spoke up. Can we all just calm down for a second? This isn't helping anything. I turned to her, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. Lauren, why the hell are you still defending them? They've lied to both of us. How can you be okay with this? I'm not okay with it, she said quietly. But they're my parents. I can't just turn my back on them. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I understood that family loyalty was important, but there had to be a line. And it was clear that Lauren's line was a lot further out than mine. James, meanwhile, wasn't done trying to justify himself. You're acting like we're some kind of villains, he said, his voice full of self-righteousness. But we're just trying to do what's best for our family. And if you're serious about being part of this family, you should be willing to step up. I was baffled by the audacity. Yeah, pay for him. And then what? I get the prize of being the groom of the year? I looked at him. You don't get to decide what's best for me, I said. And if this is what being part of your family looks like, I want no part of it. Patricia gasped like I'd slapped her, and James's face turned red with anger. Maybe you're not as committed to Lauren as we thought, he said. That comment was the last straw. I stood up and looked at Lauren and said, I wanted to build a life with you, but you already broke the respect I held for you, and I can't marry into a family that treats me like a bank account and doesn't even respect me enough to be honest. Lauren looked like she was about to cry, but she didn't say anything. James started to say something, but I held up my hand to stop him. You've said enough, I told him. This conversation is over. I walked out of the house feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep letting them control me. When I got home, I sent Lauren a text. I need some time to think. Please don't call me for now. She didn't reply. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, I got a call from one of my coworkers. He told me that James had called him, asking questions about my finances and implying that I wasn't responsible enough to handle a family. That was it. The line had been crossed. That was it. The line had been crossed. I called Lauren and told her we needed to meet, but this time I wasn't looking for a conversation. It was closure. I'd given her parents far more chances than they deserved, and Lauren had done nothing to stand by me. She broke my trust, and there was no coming back from that. When we met up, I didn't sugarcoat it. We're done, I said, cutting straight to the point. She started defending her parents again, but I cut her off. Forget them for a second. This is about us. And right now, it feels like I'm standing alone while you're backing them up. I can't build a life like that. She looked stunned, her voice trembling as she said, I never wanted it to be like this. Well, this is where we are, I replied, standing up. And one more thing. Tell your parents to leave me alone. No more calls, no more voicemails, no more rumors. I'm done with this circus, and I'm done with you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded quietly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I glanced at her and walked away without looking back. And that wasn't just the end of our relationship. It was me finally taking back my peace. But I know her parents won't stay quiet. Final update. Hi everyone, thanks for following along. This will be my final update, and honestly, I wish it ended on a quieter note. So I walked away from Lauren that night feeling like I'd made the hardest decision of my life, but also the right one. What I didn't realize was that her family wasn't about to let me go quietly. The next day, I started getting texts from unknown numbers. The first one was short and vague. "You'll regret this." I didn't think much of it, figuring it was some spam message. But then another one came, and this one was more direct. "You don't just walk away from family obligations." It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. I ignored the text at first, but they kept coming. James and Patricia were relentless, and they weren't even trying to hide it. One message said, "You're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life." Another one accused me of being selfish. "You clearly don't know the meaning of family if you can't handle this responsibility." I blocked the numbers, but that wasn't enough to stop them. Patricia started leaving voicemails instead, hinting that they were considering taking legal action against me for wasting their time and money. It was like they were trying to wear me down, hoping I'd cave just to make it all stop. So, I called my lawyer that same day to ask if there was anything I could do to make it stop. The lawyer told me to keep a record of everything: texts, voicemails, emails, anything that could be used as evidence if things got worse. He also suggested sending a formal cease and desist letter, which I did. For a few days, things were quiet. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message and decided to back off. But then Patricia took things to a whole new level. She started posting about me on social media. Some vague stuff like, "Some people just don't know how to honor commitments." But it quickly turned into full-on attacks. She wrote a long post accusing me of leading Lauren on, wasting their family's time and money, and refusing to do the right thing. The comments on the post were a mix of sympathy for her and confusion from people who knew me. A few mutual friends reached out, asking what was going on, and I had to explain the whole mess. One friend said, "Man, she's making you sound like the worst person on the planet. But anyone who knows you knows this is total BS." That helped a little, but the damage was already done. Patricia's post had been shared dozens of times, and it felt like the whole world was suddenly weighing in on my private life. Meanwhile, Lauren stayed quiet. I thought maybe she was finally starting to see how toxic. By this point, I was completely drained. The constant harassment, the social media attacks, the guilt trips, it was like they were trying to break me down piece by piece. But instead of making me reconsider, it only solidified my decision. I realized I didn't just step away from trouble, I escaped a sinking ship. If this was how they acted when I said no to one demand, how would they have treated me over the course of a lifetime? The fallout was messy, but eventually it started to fade. The social media posts stopped, the texts and voicemails slowed down, and I started to feel like I could breathe again. Lauren and I haven't spoken since that last meeting, and honestly, I don't care to. She made her choices, and I made mine. I'm not wasting another second on someone who couldn't stand by me when it mattered. If she wants to sit with her parents and justify their nonsense, that's her problem, not mine. Life moves on, and so do I. James and Patricia taught me that lesson the hard way. Looking back, I wish I'd seen the red flags sooner, but I don't regret standing my ground. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that setting boundaries isn't just important, it's necessary. And as much as walking away created damage, I know I made the right choice. Because in the end, no relationship is worth sacrificing your self-respect. I'll never forget the lessons I learned from Lauren and her parents, but I won't let them define me either. Life's too short to spend it tied to people who only see you as a resource. So yeah, I walked away from a relationship I once thought would last forever. And yeah, it hurt. But in the end, I came out stronger, wiser, and more confident in what I want for my future. If you've ever been in a situation like mine, where someone tries to control you or guilt you into giving more than you can, let this be your reminder. You don't owe anyone your peace of mind. Trust me, it's worth everything to protect it.